Following program is sponsored by Adams Financial Concepts. Welcome to About Money, a different approach to investing you won't hear anywhere else. Your host, Mike Adams, is a registered investment advisor and works with investment portfolios exceeding over $100,000 in net worth and has a proven track record of managing long-term investments, surpassing the markets in the long term. The information shared in the following program is for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. And now, here's Mike.
So it is Saturday, and we are stay at home, but we are broadcasting remotely, and we are going to be talking about money. So stick with me. I want to take you back for a moment to some history. I will bring you up to date and tell you how this applies as we get later into the program, so don't go away. Have no guest today, but I do have information that you want to hear. So I want to start back. 1878. There's a young man, 24 years old. He was a junior clerk at Rochester Savings Bank. He wanted to take a vacation, and he wanted to go to Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. His name was George Eastman, and he wanted to record the trip. He wanted to take a camera of the time, 1878. But those cameras in 1878, what they were big. You needed a big tripod. You needed a jug of water. And the pictures came out on a very heavy plate. So you not only needed a heavy plate, but you needed a heavy plate holder. You needed glass tanks. You need chemicals. And to develop the plates, you needed a large tent where you should shut out all the light. It was a wet process to make the pictures. They could be made. They were made. We see pictures from that time and even before that time. But this young man, just 24 years old, decided that he wanted to perfect this, and he wanted something more portable. And so he began to work in his kitchen. Fact is, he never did go on that trip, but it took him 2 years. And he built a machine where he could use a dry plate rather than the wet plate. And based on that, he decided to start his own company called the Eastman Dry Plate Company. And in the next couple of years, he developed, going beyond those heavy plates, he wanted to develop something that you could record on a film. And by 2 years later, he had developed a film. And a few years later, he developed a camera that could take a roll of film. And he came up with a slogan, "You press the button, we do the rest." It was still the Eastman Dry Plate Company. And he wanted a catchier name. He wanted a name that would be more suitable. It was a branding kind of thing. And George Eastman's favorite letter was the letter K. And so he chose the name Kodak. In 1892, the Eastman Dry Plate Company became the Eastman Kodak Company. There was no Kodak person. It was just he liked the letter K and he liked the name Kodak. And so Eastman Kodak Company was born. And its view, George Eastman's view in 1892 as he started that company was that it was going to be a chemical supply and dry goods purveyor. But soon after he started that, he realized he could start taking photographs and make it an everyday affair. And the slogan moved to be as convenient as a pencil. And so for the next 100 years, Eastman Kodak did exactly that, making photographs an everyday affair. So now I want to take it forward to 1973. And there was a young engineer, a graduate from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute, RPI. And he took an engineering job at Kodak. And his boss asked him for a very small request. His boss told him that at Fairchild Semiconductor, they had invented a device that could take a small charge. That was a device. to be used with transistors, and they called it a charge-coupled device, a CCD. And it was an easy way to move electronic charges around a transistor. Remember those? We had transistor radios, we had transistors in TVs. And transistors were new at that time in 1973, and they were very big. But his boss wanted to know if these devices could be used for imaging. So Stephen Sassoon, this RPI graduate just out of school, started using CCDs, these charge-coupled devices, to make the first digital still camera and a digital recording device. You can imagine it. It was like a 1970s Polaroid camera crossed with a speak and spell. And it was huge. Weighed 8.5 pounds. It was the size of a toaster. And it was grainy, very grainy photos, less than 1/100 of a megapixel. You know, we talk in hundreds of megapixels today, or thousands of megapixels. This had less than 1/100 of a megapixel. And it could only take black and white digital images. And you could take up to 30, but they had to be stored on a cassette tape, external to this camera device. It was very crude. But in fact, it was the very first digital camera made by the Kodak company. Now I want to take it forward further to 1996, because Kodak, by 1996, had 140,000 employees. They had a $28 billion market cap, and effectively they had a monopoly on their category. They owned 90% of the film that was being sold. 90% of the film market was Kodak film. 85% of all cameras sold were Kodak cameras. So they had the market. They had essentially a monopoly. 90% of the film, 85% of the camera. And the Kodak executives and management viewed their business as being in the photographic business. They had the desire to record our lives and capture the moment and record those key events and times, but they viewed themselves as being in the photographic business. Whereas the reality is their business was recording memories. In reality, it wasn't what they saw. They saw themselves in the photography business. And they saw the digital camera as undercutting their chemical and photographic film business. They didn't see how this crude black and white 0.01, 1/100th of a megapixel image camera could ever grow exponentially to provide high-resolution images. And so they chose to ignore it. They could have dominated the market. They already had 90% of the film market, 85% of the camera market, but they viewed the digital camera market as something being something that would undercut their chemical and film business. And so instead of deciding to dominate the market, they let the market corner them. They could have cornered the market. Instead, they let the market corner them. Kodak had lasted for over 100 years, but overtaken and followed out with bankruptcy. You know, the way that applies today is there's a huge turnover taking place, and it's taking place more rapidly. I've mentioned any number of times the study that Richard Foster of Yale did showed that the average life of companies that were in the Standard & Poor's in 1920, their average life was 70 years. Eastman Kodak was even longer than that. Eastman Kodak was 120 years. But the average life of the Standard & Poor's companies that were in the Standard & Poor's in 1920 was 70 years. Today, that's down to 15 years. Innosight, which is a business consulting and strategy company, they help companies figure out strategy, say that 50% of the Standard & Poor's 500 companies today are facing creative destruction. And I'm going to tell you how all this applies to where we are today. Babson School of Business out of Boston says by 2025, that's 5 years from now, 40% of today's companies are no longer going to exist. They're going to lose their earnings, they're going to lose their markets, and by 2025, 3/4 of the companies in the Standard & Poor's will be companies that don't exist today. And maybe 2025 is too optimistic, but certainly it's not unrealistic to think that by 2030, that's going to be true. And maybe it will be 2025. There's a creative destruction and a change that's happening in the companies, and we see it over and over and over again. We see companies that were the bluest of the blue chips that don't exist anymore. I often talk about the companies that were in 1966, the bluest of the blue chips, the Woolworths, the Union Carbides, the Anaconda Copper, the U.S. Steel, the Bethlehem Steel, the companies that were part of that group in 1966, a lot are either dissolved and bankrupt or completely gone. That's what's happening today. And the coronavirus and COVID-19 are going to accelerate that even more. And that's what I'm going to talk about as we come to the next section. We're coming to a commercial break, so don't go away. I want to cover this because there's so much to talk about and so many things to look forward to.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
Okay, so I was talking about the Eastman Kodak and the change that's happening today. Think back just 25 years ago. There were 2 newspapers in Seattle. If you wanted to get a CD or a record, you could go to a place like Tower Records, and you would find a huge variety of records, of CDs that you could plug in and play. There were record stores. If you wanted to watch a movie, you could go to a video store and rent a video. In the early days of video stores, you could even rent a video machine, but that disappeared as video recorders became cheaper and cheaper. But you could go rent the latest movies for $1 or $1.50, whatever it was. 25 years ago, there was a travel agent on almost every street corner, 6 or 8 in every mall. All of those are gone. Well, there's one newspaper in Seattle, but it seems to get smaller and smaller every year. That was 25 years ago. What happened? We had the internet. We had the dot-com bust. And lifestyles began to change. Technology began to change. And there was an acceleration in the turnover of companies. Goodbye record stores. Goodbye video stores. Goodbye travel agents. Goodbye some newspapers. All that happened. The internet came into being. And that was just 25 years ago. But think 15 years ago. 15 years ago, would you have thought about flying to a different city to get into a stranger's car to take you around a distant city? And not only getting into that stranger's car, but staying in a stranger's house. Would you have thought of that 15 years ago? But today, that's standard. Uber and Lyft will take you around. You can check into a stranger's house through Airbnb. You can rent an apartment. You can rent a space. You can rent a bedroom in a place through Airbnb. You can fly overseas and do that as well. Who would have thought 15 years ago the second best selling luxury car, second only to Mercedes-Benz, the second best luxury car would be an electric vehicle. And not only was it the second best luxury car, it was the pace setter for probable destruction of the internal combustion engine. That's the Tesla. Who would have thought that 15 years ago? But we had the Great Recession, and that was an acceleration as well. So we're coming through a phase right now. Here's the issue. We've been going through the COVID GDP. We've seen the worst economy in a decade. Maybe we're going to see the worst economy we've lived in our lifetime. Annually, we've lost a third of all output and consumption. We've seen a third of our national workforce unemployed. We've seen restaurants closed. We've seen factories closed. We've seen dry cleaners closed. We've seen people working from home. We've seen 90% of flights being canceled. And even healthcare spending is down. So what does it mean? You know, the New York Times this week came out with a story, and they gave an example of one company beginning to prepare, beginning to get through this whole time, and beginning to think about the next steps. And they used the example of Buffalo Wild Wings. And their CEO, they had a comment and information, quotes from him. Buffalo Wild Wings has 1,238 restaurants. There's no walk-in dining. There's no in-restaurant dining. They are doing carry-out. And as they shut down their restaurants to do the stay-at-home, to do the shelter-in, to go through this coronavirus pandemic, the CEO split his managers into two teams, with one team that was how to survive and the other team how to reopen. And the team that was tasked with how to survive, they were tasked on how to cut the cost and how to get product out the door. They needed to renegotiate leases. They needed to cancel contracts for linens and window cleaning and music. They needed to see how they could generate business from having people not walk in or not dine in. They need to have online ordering. That was the one team. The other team is what do you do to reopen the stores? How do you go about this? How do you do it when you have to have menus that are paper and not plastic anymore? How do you do it? And the menus have to be disposable. How do you do it when the people have to wear a mask and gloves? What sort of cleaning has to take place? The second team was tasked there. And when I read the article, I talked to one of my friends, Roger Stilson. He's been on the program a couple times. Roger Stilson has Mama Stortini. And they're surviving this COVID-19 stay-at-home time. They are doing takeout. You can order from 11 a.m. to 8 p.m. And they have tried to maintain their menu during this time. They have a chopped salad and a Caesar salad. They have bread. They have a bruschetta, tomato, basil salad. They have meatballs. And they have their main entrees. They have chicken parmesan, which I really like. They have a grilled salmon. They have an original lasagna, which is very good. They have ziti bologna with roasted meatballs. They have spaghetti and meatballs. They have chicken fettuccine alfredo and seafood fettuccine. They have a spaghetti with fettuccine rositi. And for them, not only can you order and it will be delivered, they will toss in the dessert. They have a homemade salted caramel chocolate mousse dessert. And that's free when you order the meal. You know, because he's a friend, because he's been on the program, I would recommend that you can order. You can order a bottle of wine to go with it too. The menu is a very good menu. The food is very good. My wife and I are doing a Zoom virtual meal with another couple. I would suggest you may want to do the same thing. Saturdays are great great night. Sunday's a great night. You should do it. We need to support the restaurants. DoorDash will deliver, or you can pick up. The food is very good. So I talked to Roger. The question is, how do you reopen? Restaurant cost, about a third is food, a third is labor, and a third is overhead. If you do social distancing and open at 25% of capacity, your lease and your overhead consume a third of your cost. If you're at 25%, you're at a great disadvantage. You know, some of the best restaurants generate $1,000 per square foot of space. If you cut the capacity to 25%, you cut their revenues to $250 per square foot. And if their cost for labor is $300, their cost for food is $300. I mean, you have a significant change. For the average restaurant, maybe $500 per square foot. Think of what that does to their cost. And you can see the issue. So restaurants are going to have to be creative, and there's going to be changes. A number probably will not survive. Knowing Roger, knowing what he's done in the past, I would guess that Mama Sterkini's will make it. I could even guess even better if you continue to order. And if I sound like I'm promoting, I'm promoting. I have no ownership. I don't have any other interest other than Roger as a friend and that he's been on the program a couple times. But it's not just restaurants. That, you know, some of the things I mentioned before, I once had a travel agent who was a client. And as the internet came in the 90s, I said, what are you going to do? And he said, I have a secure job. People are always going to need a travel agent to arrange their trips. It's a complicated affair to get everything set up. You know, today he's not a travel agent anymore. He's gone. But during that time of the .com time, travel agents went, video stores, record stores, papers went out of business. But who could have foreseen that? You know, who could have foreseen what was going on at that time? Coming out of the Great Recession or going into the Great Recession, who would have seen that the two largest taxi companies in the world in 2020 would be companies that own not a single taxi? Who would have imagined that the biggest hotel chain in the world would not own a single hotel room? Who would have imagined that there would be a car revolution going on, going from electric and doing away with the internal combustion engine? All of that was set in place with the Great Recession. There are some things that we can see are coming and will be happening. That's what we need to do. The aim of this program is to put you ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve. The way I invest for my clients is to look forward and not behind, to anticipate what's coming. And some things that look like they're coming are not going to work out. Other things do. But in order to do well, you have to look forward and not backwards. There are things that are coming, and once we get beyond this commercial break that's coming up, I'm going to talk about some of the areas which are going to happen. We're moving from BC to AC, before COVID-19 to after confinement, BC to AC. What's going to happen? Where are the investments going to be? Where do we look? I'm going to be talking about that. But don't go away. I'll be right back after this commercial break. Stay with me.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money continues. Remember the website, adamsfinancialconcepts.com. Here's Mike.
I've been talking about the changes that are going on and the acceleration that's happening. Because as we go through each one of these upsets in the market, as we go through each one of these upsets, we have seen a tremendous surge in new technology, in new lifestyles, in new demographics. And as we look at those things, we need to anticipate what's going to happen now. I say we're moving from BC to AD or AC. BC to AC. We're moving from before COVID-19 to AC, which is after containment. What's going to be happening? I believe there's several things in the pipeline that are coming that are going to be accelerated. I believe we're going to see autonomous cars. It's coming. It's going to come faster than anyone ever thought, I think. There's autonomous cars. There's going to be fewer accidents and fewer fatalities. Insurance is going to be lower. And I think there's going to be a lot fewer people that own a car. It'll be a matter of dialing into your phone app, setting up the parameters of the type of car you want to go to, and the car will arrive at a certain time, pick you up, and take you to where you want to go, and there will be no driver. The car will be electric. It'll be controlled remotely. It will drive at a regular speed limit. It will not exceed speed limits. It won't weave in and out of traffic. You know, I weave in and out of traffic, but those cars will not do that. Those cars are coming, and it's coming sooner than most people expect. We're going to see the application of virtual reality. And there, you know, we're seeing some firms, we're seeing some architectural firms that are using it for their clients to take them on a virtual reality tour of the new building that's being built before it ever gets off the drawing boards. We're seeing companies, manufacturing companies, that are using it in their design work. But it's like the internet prior to the dot-com time. It's a technology which we only have begun the very rudimentary beginnings of. But I believe that as we come out of this coronavirus pandemic, I believe we'll see an acceleration of virtual reality. As we see differences in social distancing, as we see differences in the way people react, we're going to see virtual reality take an augmentation. We're going to see bioengineering change as well. Biotech's already established. We could see a biotech vaccine for coronavirus, the pandemic. But biotech is just beginning. On my program, I had the people from Blue Marble. And Colby Underwood, Blue Marble CEO, and he talked about what Blue Marble does. Petroleum product, the creation of oil in the ground. It took bacteria millions of years to convert plant waste to oil. But they can do that. They can take plant waste, the pumice from canned tomatoes, what's left over, what's thrown out as garbage when you're canning tomatoes. They can take pumice and they can convert it into petroleum products in a couple days. They've taken the bacteria from a whale, the bacteria from a cow. Whales eat plankton, cows eat grass and grain. They combine those bacteria and they make a petroleum product. And they realized that if you look at a tube of toothpaste, 4 or 5 of the products in your tube of toothpaste are petroleum chemicals. They can make those petroleum chemicals from that organic material that's thrown away. The mesh left over from making beer, they're making petroleum chemicals from that. That's just one example. There are 2 professors at Penn State that have built a cylinder with an anode at one end and a cathode at the other end, and they put wastewater in that cylinder, and they've re-engineered, they've modified E. coli bacteria, and those bacteria produce electricity as they grow. So those bacteria, in consuming the wastewater and the filth that's in the water, those bacteria produce electricity. Those are, and I'm sure it's not economical at this point, no more than that rudimentary camera that was built by Sassoon for Kodak. But these are things that are happening, and we're going to see more and more of those. coming out of bioengineered materials. We're going to see advanced materials, stronger, lighter, different applications, more flexible. When you think about an oyster shell, it's very, very durable. But if you look at it, it's just a number of layers that are layered down. And each layer is no more than a fine paper. You can rip it and tear each one of those layers apart. But when you put it all together, you end up with a very hard shell. We're going to see advanced materials come out. And I believe that that's going to accelerate. It's going to make changes in making cars, in aircraft. It's going to make things much lighter and much stronger. And talking about cars, we're going to see alternative energy as well. A lot of battery technology is going to be improved. We're going to see geothermal become a source along with wind and with solar. And we're going to see a greater emphasis more and more on alternative energy and use of alternative energy like solar. It's going to become cheaper and cheaper. We're going to see changes happening in healthcare. Not just drugs. We'll see a lot of drugs. We'll see drugs that are engineered through biotechnology. But we're seeing more than that. One of my favorite things I always talk about is a toilet that's manufactured in the UK. And what it takes is when you make your deposit in the toilet, that toilet will chemically analyze what you leave in the toilet and figure out what's missing in your diet. And it will send an order off to the grocery store to deliver what you're deficient in your diet. We're going to see more things like that. We're going to see devices which monitor your health. Through this COVID thing, there's people that are talking about these oximeters that you can measure your pulse and your oxygen. We're going to see more things like that. And some of them are probably going to be plugged into your smartphone, so that the phone will monitor your health, monitor your pulse, will monitor whatever's going on. That's all going to be automatic and capable. I wear a Fitbit, measures my pulse, it measures my heart rate, it measures my sleep time. We're going to see more and more devices. And not only that, those devices are going to be connected to a doctor's office. They can be connected to a system which will alert your doctor or your healthcare provider that there's something wrong, that some intervention needs to be made. Those things are coming. And I believe that we'll probably see an acceleration coming out of the COVID thing. We're going to see a change in robotics. One of the things we've seen is the problems with the spread of the virus through the pandemic. A lot of the meat processing plants that are ordered back to work. But think of what would happen if a lot of that processing was done by robots. We're not yet to the point of R2-D2 and C-3PO like out of the Star Wars. We're not quite there, but we're on our way. We are on our way. In Japan, they're developing robots to take care of elderly and nursing patients that are in nursing homes. Those robots can actually toilet a person. They can clean the bed. Because Japan, in the next few years, is going to have a shortage of 4,000 caregivers. So they're developing robots to take care of that. And robots are not very friendly, so they've even developed a cuddly robot that you can cuddle with. There's going to be more. They're going to produce robots in the level, maybe not of R2-D2 or C-3PO, but we're on our way there. All these are areas of development. Like Kodak, many of today's blue chips are going to pass away. They're going to go the way of Kodak because their business is not what will be the future. Companies need to reset their targets and their focus and understand what their business model is and what the changes in lifestyles are, what the changes in demographics are, what the changes in technology are, and they need to adapt. That's coming. That is something that really needs to be done. we're coming to a time. We saw an acceleration coming through the .com, and you think about all the things you rely on the internet. That wasn't happening before the .com bust. It's happened since then. Think about the Great Recession and the things that have changed in the way we're living differently since the Great Recession. Every time we go through one of these setbacks, we see an acceleration of new technology, new lifestyles, changes in demographics, and each one of those is an investment opportunity if you're ahead of the curve rather than behind the curve. And that's the focus of this program, to put you ahead of the curve and not behind the curve. We're going to come back after this commercial break, and I'll wrap up because it really is important to understand where we're headed and why we're headed there and where you can benefit from it. So don't go away. We'll be right back.
About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on Adams Financial Concepts. About Money with Mike Adams on AM 1590, The Answer. For more information, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com.
So, in 1987, I went to a biotech conference. I'd just been licensed for a year in the industry. I went to a biotech conference in San Diego. There were 8 companies that were presenting. It was a conference sponsored by Paine-Webber, and I was working for Paine-Webber at that time. And one of those companies became one of my first stocks. I held that stock for over 10 years. But the manager of Paine-Webber's healthcare analyst, the guy that was overall, said something that stuck with me for a long time. He said, there's only been one injectable drug that sold $1 billion worth. So companies in the biotech field are going to have only a small niche. They're not going to have many revenues. They're going to address small problems. But the real companies that are going to make a difference are the big pharmaceutical companies. And as I thought about that, I didn't believe it then. I certainly don't believe it now. It's not been true. But that's something that he believed, and he was very strong in his statement. And he put up charts and graphs and whatever. I came out of that thinking I needed to choose one, and there was only one that I understood, and that became one of my stable companies. But, statistically, some of the things he said were true. One is a lot of drugs fail. Back in those days, 5 out of every 6 drugs that moved into human clinical trials never made it out of clinical trials. And as we moved into the 1990s and biotech became more a focused industry, a number of people said you needed to take a basket approach. Take a basket of biotech companies. Some would fail. True. A few would make it. But if you took a basket, one of those companies in the basket would probably always be a winner. And that was probably true. But the few that gave good returns could not offset the duds. And I think of that in terms of index funds, because the fact was those baskets, to the best of my knowledge, and I follow that, I don't believe any one of those baskets ever outperformed the Standard & Poor's 500. Even though they had some very great companies in those baskets, and companies that went on to be major biotech companies, they couldn't overcome the failures. Not one that I know of ever did better than the Standard & Poor's 500. And that brings me to index funds, because index funds are primarily a basket full of stocks. Some companies in that index are going to die. They're moving in. They need to be hospitalized already. Going through this pandemic, those companies are already beginning to stagger. And I believe it's going to be a stock picker's market. I just got my April results, and the Standard & Poor's down 10% for 2020. My clients are down 1%. A few are a little less than 1%, some are above 1%, but basically, if you look at all of the composite, it's 1%. You know, dollar-wise, 11 years ago, if you look at where we were 11 years ago, my average client started with $100,000 is at $560,000. The Standard & Poor's with dividends reinvested at $452. You know, at the end of April, I had outperformed the Standard & Poor's by only 2.3%, but that's what 2.3% difference does. 560 to 452, that's a $108,000 difference. My clients are 20% better off than have been investing in an index. And that doesn't mean that some of those stocks in the index have not done better than I did. Very true, they have done better than I have done. But what happens is, in a basket, you have the duds dragging down the good ones. You know, it's not a situation that a tideless all boats, and when the tide goes out, you get to see who's swimming naked. It's not that at all. It's just that some companies, if you look at their growth, they start, they accelerate, they're on an exponential up, they begin to reach a peak, and it's like a lay down S, or that curved track, which starts, it accelerates, and then it slows down. Or the COVID cycle. You know, you see the cases mount until you reach a peak, and then they start down the other side. You see companies like that. Some will have a very short term and a very steep curve. Some will have a longer curve. But eventually, if they don't make changes, they're going to die. And those are going to be the companies which drag down the index. I'm always looking forward. My process is that I look at 40 to 50 stocks, or 30 to 40, it's probably more accurate, per month. And from that, I will look at the financials on 8 or 9, and from that, I will drill down on 1 or 2. I'll read the 10Ks to 10Qs. I don't talk to management. I used to talk to management, but I found out that they always paint a rosy picture, a great story, and that's just what it is. It's a story. It's not reality usually. And so I look at the numbers. I'm a numbers guy. And I look down, I look at how the numbers are. And, you know, analysts talk to managements a lot. And you can check their accuracy. They've got a pretty bad track record. So I drill down. I look at 1 or 2 companies every month. I read the 10Ks and the 10Qs. I just finished one yesterday. And those 10Ks and 10Qs give me some indication. And with that, I will probably do 1 or 2 trades per year. One of the stocks in my portfolios has been there since 1996. And I'm trimming it back now in new clients. I don't even add that stock to the portfolio. But it's been there in some portfolios for 24 years. So we are moving from what I call BC to AC. We're moving from before COVID-19 to after confinement. So be alert for the changes that are happening. As I was growing up, we had to do one thing. We had to memorize a poem by Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Maybe you remember it. It starts this way: "Listen, my children, and you shall hear the midnight ride of Paul Revere. On the 18th of April in 75, hardly a man is now alive who remembers that famous day and year of the midnight ride of Paul Revere." That's the way a book starts as well. A book called, I don't care whether Paul Revere wrote or not. And I like what he writes. He wrote, "Imagine for a moment it's 1923. Al Capone is assembling an army of gun-toting henchmen in Chicago. They will number 700 before he's through. Cotton farmers in the South are sunk in depression. The Ku Klux Klan is on the rise. Newspaper headlines tell of corruption in the Veterans Bureau. The director had to resign. Rumors in the Capitol hint of the coming Teapot Dome scandal. And eventually, 2 secretaries in the cabinet will go to jail, convicted of murder. But those are the things that concern the President of the United States. Where is Warren Harding as he's turning the country on a campaign swing that will prove to be as last as a recent attack on the legend of Paul Revere? An iconoclast had noted that Paul Revere never completed the ride made famous by Longfellow before giving warnings. And what he goes on to say is, we may be less scandalized today than we were on Harding in 1923, but I think we're less cynical than we think we are. The evidence suggests we're just as susceptible to mythology as Americans in the past. The danger is not that we have missed. The danger is hiding from the fact that they are missed. Don't get caught up in looking at what has happened. Look forward and look for the investment opportunities in the future. Don't get involved in the myths of the past. Look to the future. That wraps it up today. Have a great rest of the weekend and week. I'll be back next Saturday.
Listening to About Money with Mike Adams, a registered investment advisor. If you'd like more information about what you heard today, or about Mike's investment philosophy and strategy, or if you'd like Mike to evaluate your own portfolio, click on adamsfinancialconcepts.com. That's adamsfinancialconcepts.com. The information shared in the preceding program was for educational purposes only, and any investment advice given may not be suitable for all investors. Join us again next Saturday at noon for more About Money with Mike Adams, here on AM 1590. The Answer. The preceding program was sponsored by Adams Financial.